For the past 4 months, I have been curating a collection of works that span across a variety of different media into the gallery you hopefully all had the opportunity to explore earlier. Don't worry if you didn't have the chance yet. After I give an overview of the project, there will be time for a discussion and exploration later. When deciding what to do for my research project, I was very aware of the fact that I'd be presenting my findings to an audience over Zoom. So I wanted to create something that was as interactive and engaging as possible. I also knew that I wanted to learn more about the world of feminist art, which I'd always been interested in. Putting these two ideas together and through a lot of brainstorming with Kiki, Andy, and Miranda, I came up with the idea to create an online gallery. Medium. So if I had to choose one thing that I missed the most during the pandemic, it'd be a casual visit to the MFA or ICA. I love how these museums are specially curated to move the visitor through space that forces them to interact with the art on display. Although many art museums are creating virtual experiences which allow for COVID-safe art viewing, like the example I've pulled from the MFA here. For this experience to work, the user needs to have a really strong understanding of what moving through virtual space in a first-person perspective is. And there's only one path that the user can take throughout the gallery, moving from one white dot to the other on the floor. Additionally, the user needs to have a computer that's powerful enough to run the simulation, and as the MFA site points to, the medium doesn't allow for the easy integration of screen readers. And on a more personal note, the animations that the MFA site uses to convey that the user is moving through virtual space makes me really dizzy. Taking these concerns about virtual environment into consideration, I wanted to hone in on what I did want my gallery to be able to do. I wanted users to be able to explore. I personally love wandering through a museum without a map or a plan and just allowing myself to stumble upon something new. So to replicate that feeling of discovery and exploration, I decided to use the software Twine to develop my gallery. Twine is a free open source tool that is used to create interactive text-based environments. It has an active community of small creators that I had the opportunity to collaborate with that use the software to tell interactive stories or make simple video games. It was notably used by the writer Charlie Brooker to develop the interactive Netflix film Bandersnatch, where viewers must make decisions for the main character that affect the outcome of the story. The gallery. In terms of the gallery's content, I curated approximately 30 pieces of art. All of the pieces were chosen because they interact with or interrogate feminist themes. The 4 main categories that branch out from the home landing page are space, body, medium, and pandemic. I didn't set out with the intention of finding works that fit into these themes. Rather, I found works that spoke to me and then curated these categories to organize the pieces and to create more of a gallery feel, as if one is walking through different rooms in a building. For example, in the space section, if one were to click down this path, they'd be met with a spoken word piece by Vanessa Kusul that recognizes the world wasn't built for women to take up space and that we have to claim and build it for ourselves. It's then followed by a song by feminist punk band Bikini Kill about the anger and frustration of feeling like you need to abandon the feminine parts of yourself to be able to take up space. It's then followed by one of 2 eerie images, depending on which path you click, from Juno Calypso about women's spaces that aren't truly a room of one's own. And then it ends with one of my favorite pieces in the collection, Juno Birch in drag at the grocery store. Thinking back on the curation of this collection, I'm really struck by how much the visual themes represent my own personal definition of feminism and the discovery of that definition. For example, I'd say that my version of feminism is very aware of identity, power, and access, which many of these pieces do interrogate in their visual themes or medium. Structure. So for a closer look at the gallery structure, here's a visual representation of all of the possible paths one could take throughout the gallery. Each white square represents a portion of the gallery wall, and each arrow points towards a possible route the viewer could take from one piece to another. Each viewer must start at the welcome page and click through the introductory information, but once they reach the home landing page, there are a plethora of different routes that the viewer can explore. For example, as you saw in the email, if a user spent 5 minutes in the gallery and clicked through 3 different pieces, there are over 4,000 unique paths in the gallery. And here is one example of one of those 4,000 paths. Earlier, I asked Andy to click through the gallery, and this is the route he took. He started at the homepage, moved to body, and then hair, and then explored more from the artist. Here's a more visual representation of Andy's path. As you can see, he encountered the work of Layetta Kai. This piece here was created in solidarity with the Me Too movement and depicts a man lifting up a woman's skirt. The most haunting aspect of this image for me are Kai's eyes staring directly at the viewer, reminding them of their own gaze and perhaps inaction in this situation. This is a really interesting cross-section of the gallery because it highlights an artist that creates poignant and interesting work, but one who creates it for Instagram. When we think about feminist art, I'm of the view that the academy, if you will, shouldn't be limited to what's in museums. Instagram art is much more accessible. This theme of accessibility persists throughout the gallery with the inclusion of not only celebrated women artists, but also publicly facing free works, ranging from TikTok content to music to clips from broadcasted radio. Here is another example of a possible route throughout the gallery. Here, Kiki starts at the homepage, moves to medium, to collage, to pandemic, to alone. And again, here is a more visual representation of that path. As you can see, she encountered 2 pieces and chose to explore more from each of the artist's works. I really wanted to embed links to each of the artist's main site as a way to acknowledge the artist's authorship of their own work. Because this is an educational venture, I can't personally afford to pay all of the artists for the legal right to publicly display their work. So this was my way of inadvertently sending some kind of compensation their way. Their website gets a few more clicks, and maybe someone is moved enough to pick up something from their web store. Linking out to the artist's own site also encourages viewers to engage with the work in the context of the artist who created it. For example, instead of seeing Ana Mendita's photograph at the ICA, you're seeing the entire Silhouette series in context on her website. Looking forward, connecting this project back to my day-to-day responsibilities as a co-op, putting together this gallery allowed me to encounter work that I wouldn't have known existed if it hadn't been for this project. Being more aware of the feminist art world informed a lot of my decisions when I was tasked with researching and curating possible cover art ideas for issue 47.1 of Signs, as Susanna and Carla mentioned. And although we have not worked out the logistics for it yet, I am hoping in the future to develop a twine-style exploratory gallery from the art of the previous Signs covers to be displayed on the cover art gallery of the website. Final takeaways. If I could spend another year working on this gallery, I would expand it. Because all of the pieces are embedded from other sites, they're already hosted on someone else's server, which means expanding the gallery size doesn't affect its accessibility. If I were to add 100 more works to the collection, the file would open and run just as easily as it did for you all earlier. I'd also like to work a lot more on the aesthetic presentation of the gallery. The black background and white text certainly gets the job done, but it doesn't necessarily add anything to the gallery experience. This gallery was also a site for me to learn a lot more about myself. As I hinted at earlier, I was truly surprised by how much my own personal definition of feminism affected the content that I curated for Connections. Part of every feminist academic's journey is discovering what feminism means to them, and I feel like I have a better understanding of what that means to me. Thank you to everyone for coming to my research project presentation. I'm now going to cede the floor back to Kiki so she can bring us to the discussion portion of the meeting. I will also be sending a copy of the HTML file of the gallery in chat so everyone has easy access to the file for our discussion and exploration time.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin. Everyone join me in giving Kaitlin a huge round of applause, a silent round of applause, of course, because we're on Zoom. I think that the work that you've done here is so cool. And I wanted to thank you for sharing it with us. I would now like to open up the floor for further discussion. I'm wondering if anyone had the chance to walk through the gallery beforehand and maybe wanted to talk about the path that they took and what their takeaways were or questions that they had for Kaitlin. I'd love to hear from various audience members about their different paths, or also questions for Kaitlin about her work. So everyone feel free to go ahead and turn your videos back on, and I'll call on people to unmute themselves. Carla, would you like to start us off?
So Kaitlin, that was absolutely wonderful. And the gallery is extraordinary. And moving through it is an amazing experience. And because there are so many pathways in, right, you can keep redoing it in different ways. And without sharing my pathway, because I can't remember it all, my question for you is, having done that and having constructed this experience, which is aesthetic and pedagogical and political and intellectual, that can be different for everybody, has to be different for everybody, moves in these different ways. Has it changed your view of how you read more, and I use this advisedly, regular written texts? And has it produced for you any changes in how you think we should all be reading more regular written texts?
I definitely understand what you mean by more regular.
Yeah,
the term I used was like more public facing and more accessible. I personally think that like anything, well, coming from an English major background, I think that anything can be read intellectually and through the feminist lens and perspective. So I'm not quite sure which path that you took, but one of the examples I like to point to was this TikTok creator who is talking about the practice of making bobbin lace. And technically that is content that is publicly facing. It's a little informative, but the feminist part of it, which, you know, requires that feminist intellectual lens, is that she is taking what is considered to be an arts and crafts and kind of bringing it into the more fine arts realm, and also the accessibility aspect of it, where she's taking something that maybe only a few really skilled people know about and bringing it to a huge audience of people who maybe aren't able to afford all of these expensive crafting materials, aren't able to afford like classes to make it. Did that answer your question, or was there anything else you wanted me to touch on?
No, it's very helpful. I just wanted to share that part of what I found so extraordinary about the experience was that it forces reconsideration, relooking, because you end up going back to things. So that was part of what I was thinking about in terms of rereading. But the other part of the experience is that initially I had to completely give myself over to you, because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'm just clicking shit. I mean, particularly because I'm old. So like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm clicking stuff. And so you're my leader, you're my guide. But as I became obsessed with one particular artist, the woman who makes the stuff out of her hair, oh my God, I kept trying to click things that would get me back to her. So I was trying to take over leadership of the pathways from you. So at first I was this sort of very, passive, oh, Kaitlin, take me here, take me there. And then I kept trying to get back to that one. And that for me, I mean, I know this is English major to English major speaking, right? But that for me was also so much a replication of the process of moving from one kind of readership to an analytical, critical readership. And I was assuming you built that in on purpose, that experience, that sort of experience of trying to then take over from you was part of what you want the participant to get.
Well, when creating this piece of content, I didn't necessarily have that in mind. The closest thing that I have for that is, for example, the Layetta Kai artist who's creating things out of her hair that you mentioned. Absolutely amazing. I kind of lead the viewer into seeing it as a more of an identity creating piece, because I introduce it through the link titled body. And so that was kind of the only place where I was thinking that I, as the curator, have an effect over how the audience reads it. So I think it's really interesting that you had that experience, and it wasn't necessarily something that I was specifically trying to create.
It was awesome.
Margot.
Mute myself. Okay, there you go. Just a few comments, but first of all, thank you for giving us a really beautiful and experience that feels really different from this past year. So I have all these great images in my head, and it was, just I don't know, I don't use this word often, but like a delight to go through. So thank you. And I have two different things that sort of stood out for me. One is I found these themes that kept coming up for me as I went through it on my own, and then I listened to you talk about the process of going through it and the different pathways we take. Those two themes were sort of issues of agency and issues of privilege, right? So there's this sort of experience of it as being very random, who goes in what path, but at the same time, it sort of brings up questions of like, do we really have free choice, and what do we bring to the, the choices that we're making as we go through this, and sort of who's in charge of the experience? Are we in charge of our experience? Are you the one who's sort of creating this experience for us? And what about the voice or the meaning of the artist whose pieces we're looking at, right? So there's this whole sort of like, sort of exchange and dynamic relationship that changes throughout. And I kept thinking, it felt uncomfortable for me at times because, here this, like yourself, I'm assuming, we're both white, women from the US looking at this work that, you picked artists that represent, that are of different races, that represent different countries, and that represent different media and probably interpret their work a certain way. And then I started thinking, well, isn't that the thing about art and the visual image, that we can interpret it our own way, or we can interpret it the way whoever put the project or the gallery together is interpreting it, or the way the artist, like there's so many different layers. And I thought it might be good to be a little bit more upfront about those layers, like to have a piece in there that talks about the dynamic experience, and a little bit, it brings some attention to race and the global, what you're saying about sort of, I don't know, the world and how we see it visually. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, I'll just be much quicker because I know lots of people want to talk. The other thing was, I also would bring a little attention to the discipline of feminist art history. Because there is a long history of looking at things like, privilege and entitlement and, women's art and how it's received and all of that. And I just think there's some things to connect it to that takes it sort of beyond sort of your opinion and you as sort of the starting point, and let's that be the starting point. So, and I've, that's what my undergraduate work was in. So been a while, but if I can help you with any of that, I'm happy to.
Yeah, going back to that, oh, I think there's a little bit of echo if you wouldn't want to mute yourself. Thank you. All right. Going back to that idea of discomfort, I definitely created some of the paths with the intention of that little discomfort, but it the section that was aimed at that was the pandemic section. If we look back at the possible routes that you could take, a lot of the images that are completely unrelated to pandemic link back out to a piece that is connected, so you're forced to kind of confront that, and that was meant to be more of like the sudden interruption of pandemic. um so that was where I intended for some of that discomfort to come from, and I think that all of your points were certainly like very valid, and if I had another year to work on this, I would definitely be more exploring those spaces a lot more. Going back to this idea of privilege, I think that, well, all of these pieces were, I was able to access them because they're available online. They popped up in the first couple of searches. They had good SEO. The artist who created them has like a knowledge of how to work a website so that they're able to be seen and shared. So this is definitely not like a I'm on the ground looking for the newest piece of feminist work, but it's a starting point. And if we were to spend a lot more time expanding and thinking about this project, I would like it to be more of that.
Laura.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, in some ways, I think that, well, so my original question was simply going to be like, how did you do the research? And you've started answering that. I'd love to hear a little bit more, just literally like, how did you find and decide? And where did you begin? And then just two sort of thoughts associated with that. One is that, yeah, this whole question of access and privilege and sort of, I think a word we might put in is amplification. I mean, one of the things you're doing is that you're amplifying, or there's another word people use, lifting up, right? The voices that you found, which, as you say, are ones that have already like been quite successful in amplifying themselves. So that's sort of interesting. But certainly, they were not known to me. Like none of these were known to me. And like, I'm really excited to have been introduced to them. And, that kind of seems valuable. And then that leads me to think about Margot's sort of question or comment. I mean, this is actually, I think, kind of a longer conversation. On the one hand, like I was wondering, and this is, so I'm asking you two actual questions. One, how did you do your research? And two, have you ever spoken with Professor Sutton, Gloria Sutton, in the College of Art, Media and Design, who does contemporary art history, which sort of goes along with Margot's point about, there's a kind of whole feminist art history context to put this in. And then, which I was agreeing with in my mind, and then I was actually sort of resisting it a little bit, because I wonder, Margot and I are like feminist scholars of a certain age, and that was where my mind went to. But then I started thinking, no, maybe this is not exactly a project about art history. Maybe this is a project about like social media, or like, maybe it's something different. I mean, I was just struck, Kaitlin, by the way you were so fluent in, you know, concepts like, what do you call it, social media, like optimization, that SEO or whatever it is. Um, and that's actually a really different mode of transmission, and I'll stop there.
So these two questions are definitely very interlinked. I set out with in the curation process of just like, all right, these are some people that I've heard of online that I think are interesting, that I think are interrogating things that are in the feminist world of thought that I visually enjoyed. So that was like the first couple of things. And then the next round of things were works that were published in these two feminist art books that are a bit older, and so that's also a bit more representative of what gets published, what's in the academy. And then the final round of things were like the content from Instagram, the content from TikTok. So I really wanted to create a environment where something from the academy was right next to something that was very public facing. So for a lot of this content to be like on my phone, to be like on my Instagram feed, it already needed to be a little bit more like, I'm going to use the word like publicly palatable. It needed to be something that had already gotten enough clicks for it to end up being seen. Consumable, yeah, that's a good word. So definitely, like, there is an element of these works were privileged enough to be seen in the public eye, to be able to be consumed by me. That's like a strange way to put it. What was the second part of your question, or did that
Oh,
answer?
actually, that was more just a kind of point of information, which was whether you'd ever been in touch with or had a class with or anything Gloria Sutton in the art department.
I have not. I've actually never taken a art history style course. So this was very like just something that I'm interested in and I had the opportunity to learn more about.
Well,
Um,
she's a great friend of WGSS, so I might put you in touch with her because I think she'd be really interested in this project.
that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
I was just talking about her earlier and how I was disappointed that she has a competing class at this time. But I think that's a great idea, Laura. Susanna.
Fabulous work. And yes, you should be in touch with Gloria because we love her. She's really a real, feminist art historian and curator, and doing a show at MoMA this summer in New York. So, I mean, she's just terrific. I have a question that's sort of our comment that kind of falls off of what follows from what Laura was sort of musing about whether or not, it would be more, you should have that background of feminist art history sort of located in there. I mean, one of the things I loved about the whole site was its chaos.
Mhm.
I mean, I actually found that, appealing. Now that's me. I mean, but it was interesting when you showed that that initial bit about these virtual, how people go through these virtual galleries, what they're doing now. I mean, even looking at that makes me anxious, right? That follow the path, because the way you organize this, like there's all these different paths, is actually the way some people go through museums and so I mean, there is the linearity that you're supposed to do, and that's what these virtual things are trying to recreate, what they believe is the optimal viewing experience, which is to linearly go through room A, room B, you look in this side, but some of us who have been looking at art for years have always resisted that, right? It's like, I'm going to go here, there, now I need a snack, now I need a drink, then I'm coming back, and just moving all over the place with it. And so one of the things I loved about your structure was, I mean, in some ways counterintuitive, but it actually recreated for me more of my typical viewing experience of art. than the virtual thing, which just creeps me out completely, because you're right, you have to follow this step one, step two, go from this point to the next. And it's very hard for them to do it where you can just be a chaotic individual consuming in your own chaotic, bizarre way. That's what I loved about it. And it sort of raises a question, is that, I mean, we talk all the time about feminist methodologies and feminist sort of ways of seeing and so on. And I wonder if that kind of counterintuitive, nonlinear, web-like, I mean, the image, when you do these different paths, it's sort of web-like, which is a long image in feminist art and in feminist art theory, and in feminist politics. I wonder if there was a sort of subliminal structural feminism in creating this kind of multi-pathed, chaotic, but embracing the chaos as productive model, rather than the sort of linear model of, see this, and then you know enough to see this, and then you know enough to see this. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I wanted to touch on the chaotic aspect of it. It was definitely my intention to create something that was exploratory and something where you could take 10 minutes in the gallery and just devote it all to one piece and just explore more from that artist and learn more from that. Or you could take 10 minutes and look at 10 different pieces. It's very supposed to be curated to your own experience. And as to the web-like structure, I like to think of it more as nebulous. It's kind of touching on a lot of different themes and ideas. And that was very connected to my personal definition of feminism. It's not linear, it's going to change over time. It's pointing at a bunch of different things and will mean a bunch of different things to different people depending on which path you take.
Andy.
Just building kind of on that, I was wondering if there are any, after having done this, would you, if you had your own physical museum, because this kind of came out of, not being able to go to physical museums, and then you did this. So when you go back to physical museums, or if you were designing your own physical museum, could you imagine, what would the ideal museum experience look like to you? Because there's interesting, you have this kind of, webby feminist structure. I'm wondering about also, sometimes you're more present, there's more text from you. Sometimes you fall away, it's just a link or just the image itself. So could you, how would you manage that balance between kind of randomness and chaos and curation and exploration in the physical museum? Or could you?
So I think there are a couple parts to this question. I want to first address sometimes there are a lot of text where I'm the guiding curator, and sometimes there's just a link. I did that because I feel like when I'm at a physical museum, you kind of look at the art, you read the little card next to it, and then you're done. You kind of check that off your box. You can move on to a different piece. In the sites where there is only a link, you're kind of forced to, if you want to think about the art more, if you want to learn more about the artist or really get into the ideas presented, you need to go to their site, or maybe you need to watch a video of somebody else kind of explaining what they see. So it was just a new way of interaction that was possible because of the online media. So it was really using the extent to what Twine allowed me to do. As for if I were to create a physical landscape where you're able to move through. I'm sure you're all familiar with Yayoi Kusama, the beautiful sculptural, well, basically it's like a room full of mirrors and you walk into it and there are lights and sounds and things that you interact with, where it's very all encompassing and there's nowhere where you can read a little plaque. It's you are there within it. So that's the kind of thing that I would want to create. I can maybe pull up a link and find something, send it out.
Miranda.
Kaitlin, thank you. This is so brilliant. I had a question and then just a thought. My question is about your selection criteria. What made you decide, what ultimately made you decide to include a given work? And what made you, I imagine there were other works you decided not to include. What was the dividing line? I was thinking the Latin criterion is derived from the Proto-Indo-European cray, which means sieve. What did your sieve look like, so to speak? And then I was just thinking, I think some people here may be familiar with Wendy Wasserstein's play, The Heidi Chronicles. And I was just thinking about the late playwright Wendy Wasserstein and the fictional character Heidi, how they would, wishing they both could see your presentation and they would be so happy to see you embodying this hope that seemed so ephemeral and you know, distant in the 1980s when the play was written. And it's so wonderful and hopeful for the future to see. I'm thrilled by this. I have a lot of very exciting plans to talk to you about on Monday.
I am looking forward to that conversation. I'd say that my sieve, well, one part of it was very technical. Like I was not, Twine, the software doesn't allow you to post a local image. So that means that if I were to go on Google Images and then right click, save as, saved it to my computer and then uploaded it, that's not how Twine works. You need to find something that's online that can be embedded. So that was the first challenge. A lot of artists on their websites made it so that the art cannot be copy and pasted embedded into other sites, which, you know, I needed to respect because I physically could not put it on the Twine site. The other part of it, the more intellectual and fun part to think about was all of these works, I look at it and I kind of like felt that connection. Like it was very very like, ooh, like it had some sort of reaction in me. I think that if I were to continue working on this project, the criteria for what gets included might become a little bit more stringent, but because it was something that, you know, is a fun nebulous web, I could kind of just say, oh, I really like this, I want to include it.
Kaitlin, I have a question sort of jumping off from that, which is about how you made connections between the pieces. So last night I took a different path through your gallery and I went to body and then brain and then back to body and then lungs. And like lungs, creep, and spider all had this imagery that to me reminded me of roots. But I'm wondering like how you decided to connect pieces, how you decided to link from like which links you included on to which pieces and why, how those sort of connections came to you in various ways.
I think that, you know, a part of it is random, but a part of it is something visually similar to, or thematically similar to the word that is the clickable link. That's how I made a lot of the connections. But the kind of creation of a theme in the viewer's own mind doesn't really, it happens more so the viewer needs to kind of create those connections for themselves just because of the chaos. So the idea of roots that you brought up, that was something that I didn't intentionally create. You made that connection on your own, which I think is part of the fun of the chaos. Does that fully answer your question, or is there anything else you'd like me to speak on?
I guess I would be curious to know, yeah, like part of what viewing art is about, and we've sort of been talking about it around this, is making your own connections and making your own meaning from it. But I'm wondering, like, as you went through these pieces, even though you maybe didn't intend for others to have the same links as you did, if there was that sort of guiding principle of like, oh, I'm connecting, because to me, like, creep and lungs don't have a connection together. So like, what was that sort of creation process like?
For that one, it was literally the creepiness of the Louise Bourdeaux, I probably butchered. Thank you. Spider, the creepiness of it, and then the creepiness of that lungs exhibition, like just sort of instinctual feelings, like gut feelings, which, adds to the chaos. And if this were something that was going to be turned into a real physical museum, maybe wouldn't have allowed for me to do something like that, to just be a little chaotic with it. So I tried to like lean into that a little bit.
I'm also wondering about the idea of accessibility and access, and the inclusion of pieces that are available online, right? Were you inspired at all by the work that you've been doing with signs on FPIP, by the accessibility of, or the project of making accessible, making things accessible that otherwise aren't? What's the importance of accessibility to you, and in what you included in this gallery?
I think that is a really wonderful idea, something that I try to embody when I'm collaborating and making content that's being posted on our public venues like Instagram and Twitter. It's definitely, okay, how do I make this as visually appealing as possible so that people will want to look at it and will become engaged with this content? So that's where a lot of the fun, design things that you were talking about earlier come from. So it's this idea of not only is it available, but people want to go and look at it because it's somehow engaging. And I feel like I'm answering like an academic where I'm talking about all this fun theoretical stuff and then not fully answering your question. So I was definitely inspired by that process of, let's make these theoretical concepts accessible through art.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask. Yeah, Susanna, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one more, another question. Of course, I'm dying to see what you're going to do with this, with signs, and do all of our covers and have this connections be unbelievable. So now you're stuck, you have to do that. But I guess the other question was just, what do you want to do with this now? I mean, where are you going to go with this? What happens to this? I don't know what twine is because I'm an idiot. So I don't really, it's news to me. So does it live forever? Does it, I don't understand things like that. Is it there in perpetuity, or what?
And actually, Kaitlin, if I can tag on to that question, I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about something that you write in your disclaimer, which is about the ephemerality of like these links and how they might disappear.
Yeah. So for future applications of this exact project, we had a lot of discussions about, all right, this will, well, first of all, it only exists in this HTML file that I had to physically send to you. So it doesn't exist freely on the internet because we were worried about some of the copyright concerns and just concerns about like giving credit to the artists and, taking their work, things like that. So this physical HTML file is not going to exist for free to access on the internet. We were hoping to work around that by recording this meeting and then uploading like a nice edited version of it to YouTube so that the project is still able to exist in some way online, and we can still think about it and access it. As far as the kind of ephemerality, the unstableness of this medium. So because this is, one HTML file and it's not taking ownership in its structure over these different images, it is linking out and embedding to everything. If something moves on another person's site, for example, if Layetta Kai decides to like delete that Instagram post that I linked to, then it's not going to exist in this file anymore. And I kind of thought that that unstableness works with the chaos, the web-like nature of this. And it also kind of connects to the ever-changing nature of feminist thought and theory. Like sometimes things disappear and then it gets restructured, and that's, the big wonderful thing about it.
So if that happened, if let's say that Instagram thing went away and you were on your thing and you tried to click to that, what would come up? Just nothingness?
A 404 error. This does
Got
not
it.
exist.
I got it. Okay. And so this is in this form, this HTML, that has to be sent. I mean, that's not available in any public. It's not like WordPress or something like that. It's not available. It's a document that has to be sent to somebody.
Yes, it could be available online as a more website type thing,
Right.
but then that gets into the copyright concerns.
Right. Got it.
So hopefully well, now definitely, because you like the idea, I'm going to build one of these for the signs covers, which we do have the rights to share. So.
Oh, yes, you are. Yeah. Fabulous. Oh, that'd be fab. And great for the 50th anniversary. I mean, that'll be just an incredible thing for us to have. So, I mean, just what we can talk more. I'm not going to take up science time now, but we can talk more about this. I think this has just been wonderful, Kaitlin. Just wonderful. What a great project. What a treat to have, this beauty in the midst of all of the craziness we're all going through, and the depression. Oh man, that's just me. The misery and depression. But seriously, it was just such a treat to see, both to see your creativity with this and intelligence, but to see the beauty of it too. So thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, thank you all for taking time to come and experience this today, and for hearing what Kaitlin had to say. Kaitlin, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It really was, as Susanna said, beautiful and a real, was it Margot who said a delight? Yeah, it was.
Total.
So thank you everyone so much, and especially to you, Kaitlin. Really wonderful, wonderful work. And I look forward to seeing what comes next with it.
Thank you all. Thanks all for coming. Thank you, Kaitlin. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Great job, Kaitlin.
Bye.